I wanted to welcome friends and family of our beloved Bian Lesser. To us in this room, he was a beloved father and friend and brother, and just overall a good person to whom many of us loved very much. We look forward today to sharing with you a lot of stories, to unraveling his life and many of the twists and turns that he experienced in his life, to talk about him and his great qualities, to talk about him and his close relationship with his family, and to talk about the things that will inspire us and lift up our spirits and help us to be consoled in the loss that has taken place to us recently. I wanted to share with you first the Psalms, Psalm 23, first in Hebrew, then in English. Mizmor LeDavid, Adonai roi lo iksar, Bina isteshech yarbitzeni, al mei menuchos yenachaleni, Nafshi yishovev yancheni v'maglei tzedek leman shemo, Gam ki elech begeit salmavis, lo irara ki ata imadi, Shiftecha umishantecha, hema yenachamuni, Tairach lefanai shulchan neged tzairai, Dishante v'shem rosi, kosi ravaya, Achtov v'chesed yirdefuni kol yemei chayai, V'shavte v'beis adinoi, la'orech yamim. Please feel free to join me in English if you wish. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in right paths for his name's sake. Though I walk in the valley of the shadow of death, I shall fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff comfort me. Thou hast set before me a table in the presence of mine enemies. Thou hast anointed my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. We also recite Psalm 130. Shir hamalos v'mamakim kerasicha Adonai. Adonai shema v'koli tianaz nacha koshuvos l'kol tachanunai. Im avonos tishmoya Adonai miyamod ki imcha haslicha leman tivarei. Kivisa Adonai kivisa nafshi v'lidva acholti. Nafshi l'Adonai meshamrim laboker shamrim laboker. Yachel Yisrael el Adonai ki im Adonai chesed v'harbei imay fados. V'hu yifdei Yisrael mikol avonosav. A song of ascents from the depths I called you, O Lord. My Lord, hear my voice. May your ears be attentive to the sound of my pleas. If you preserve my iniquities, O God, my Lord, who could survive? For with you is forgiveness, that you may be feared. I put confidence in God, my soul puts confidence, and I hope for his word. I yearn for my Lord among those longing for the dawn, those longing for the dawn. Let Israel hope for God, for with God is kindness, and with him is abundant redemption, and he shall redeem Israel from all of their difficulties. It's not an easy thing for a son to speak on behalf of his father, especially a son who had such a deep, close, special, caring relationship with his father. So it is with great honor and a pleasure for all of us that we can call upon Frank Lesser to share a few words.
So I only knew Bian Lesser as my dad, and that's obviously something he only became in his early 40s, which is older than I am now. And I loved him as my dad, and I tried my best to help him. And loving him was always easy, and helping him sometimes a little less so. But I never knew the Bian Lesser who wasn't my dad, and not just because that's not how chronology works, but that's because that's how completely he loved fatherhood. It turned him into a new person. I think he'd have legally changed his name to Dad if my mom would have let him. And it's impossible to express how thankful I am to him and to my mom for how they raised me. But still, the first half of his life was a complete mystery to me. I'd get little hints when we drive up to Cleveland for the holidays, or when he'd accidentally let slip a risque story about the boat he and his good friend Fred Samuels owned, like when he was entertaining a lady friend below deck, only to have a second lady friend unexpectedly show up on the pier looking for him. And he never told me exactly how that story ended, only that involved a lot of shouting. And there was some other story that involved him showing up to a party in a gorilla costume. Now, not surprisingly, some of these tales involved alcohol, but I only actually found out about that much later. because I never even saw him drink a beer when I was growing up. He wanted to set a good example for me, and it worked. I didn't actually have a drink until I was almost 21. My dad was proud, but I'm sure that the pre-dad Brian would have been mortified. So I couldn't have asked for a more dedicated father, although sometimes I wanted him to be a little less dedicated since he was always worrying about me. Was I taking care of myself? Was I going to the doctor? Was I eating okay? Was I driving safely? And that's actually one of the last things he said to me less than a week ago now when I was heading out to get something to eat. Drive safe and be careful. And he was nearing the end of his life, almost too weak to speak, and I'm still what he was worrying about. And, as always, he ended the conversation not by saying goodbye, but he said, as he always said, take it easy, which was something he had trouble doing himself. So when I was looking through the notes that he had jotted down about his life, I realized it was split into two parts, and everything changed in 1976. So when he got his real estate broker's license, he started the business that he'd run for the next 40 years, Computer Credit Corporation. He moved to Columbus. Most importantly, that's when he married my mom, Lois, who truly was the only woman for him. If she had been the lady friend who had showed up at that boat from that story, he'd have immediately scuttled it to the bottom of Lake Erie. And that's essentially what he did. He moved to Columbus and gave up his seafaring ways. My mom had tamed him and brought him to a more landlocked city just to be safe. So after he moved back to Cleveland this January, I went back to the house in Columbus to clean everything out, and I found a letter that he wrote my mom shortly before their wedding. Now, he wrote me countless letters, and I've got stacks and stacks of them back in my apartment in New York, all scrawled on yellow legal paper, all still worrying about me. Am I safe? Am I going to the doctor? Am I eating? And so on. And those were all love letters in their own way, but this was an actual love letter, and it's one of the most amazing letters I've ever read. So he wrote to Lois, who was then Lois Gruen, I can't wait till we're married and together forever, so I can see and love you every morning and every night, and all the time between. Our lives together will be beautiful, I know. I won't let it be any other way. And I will always share with you, and only you, all my love forever. Now, if you knew my dad, you knew he was a willful man. If he wanted to do something, he would do it. And he did everything he said he'd do in that letter. For all my parents' struggles and setbacks and occasional little arguments, their lives together were beautiful. He loved her every morning and every night and all the time between. And I'm so grateful I got to experience that beauty and got to add to their love. And my mom died almost 3 years ago. My father never stopped loving her, just as he wrote 40 years ago. So 2 weeks from now, they would have celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary. And from the day of their marriage to an hour from now when he's laid to rest beside her, they were together forever. Cleaning out the house, I also came across a lot of other photos and keepsakes, like business cards from Lesser and Lesser Firestone, the store my father managed with his father, Frank, who was my namesake. And for all his bluster, my dad was a very sentimental man, or maybe a mild hoarder, or maybe they're one and the same. I've had all those photos and VHS tapes digitized, so I guess I'm a digital hoarder. But what really struck me looking through all those things were the photos of him as a kid, where he was cute, crafty, a bit mischievous looking, and whatever the man he was when he was a young man in Cleveland, and whatever the man he was as a husband and father in Columbus, I could still see that little kid inside him to his very last day. And as he got older and as I got older, we swapped roles, as children and parents often do. I think that's partly why he named me after his father, who died before I was born. Not just because he loved his parents, but so I'd be there to tell him what his father Frank used to tell him, to roll with the punches, to take it easy. And I'm very grateful my dad made it back to Cleveland 8 months ago to revisit and say goodbye to the part of his life that he moved on from 40 years ago. He wasn't the same Bian Lesser who once prowled the waterways and bars. Marriage had changed him, fatherhood had changed him, but he was surrounded by family and friends, by his sisters, Barbara Fisher and Frances Ross, by his nephews and nieces, by old friends like Fred Samuels and Joe Botto and Billy Goldstein, and also by new friends, because much to his surprise but no one else's, he made friends wherever he went. There was Lucille Mandel from Beechwood Commons, Freda from Menora Park Rehab, another man with a broken arm whose name I can't recall, and then the many aides and nurses that he alternately charmed and reprimanded. They all saw through his occasional bluster, probably better than I did, and realized that underneath was a charming, sensitive man who loved and missed his wife, and who was loved and will be missed by everyone here. So take it easy, Dad. I love you.
So it's not an easy job to summarize the life of a person for whose first part of his life we can't say too much about in public. And his son said so beautifully so many of the qualities of the human being. So I will try my best to share with you just an overview of his life, some things that we learned about how things went for him, from his son, from his sister, and from some other family members and friends. So our Brian was born in Cleveland to his parents Frank and Ida Lesser. So at a young age, he was mischievous. He was quite busy with many different things that were not always okay. But he was very fun-loving. He loved art and loved creative things, but gave them up kind of earlier in his life. He had a dad, his dad Frank, the namesake of his son, who wanted to be a journalist for the Plain Dealer. But he himself, as Frank alluded to, was very practical. It was important to take care of the family and do what was right, first and foremost. And one of the qualities that we saw early in our little guy was the fact that he loved his parents very much. He always looked up to them, and despite all of his mischief that he did on a frequent basis, he would never wait for his parents to come catch him on a mistake or on a lie or on something wrong. He would just feel too bad. The second they were about to open their mouth and say, "What happened here?" he would just confess and tell them what happened and that he was so sorry, because that was how much he loved his parents. He didn't want to cause them any distress. And he was always telling his son how great his parents were, how much he loved them himself. Brian finished Heights High School in 1956, and he went on to join his father in the creation of the Lesser and Lesser Firestone business that they had together for over 18 years. And I don't have this exactly quite tight, but I had a sense that he was in the business for a long time, but he wasn't so into the business at the same time. He probably knew some things customer service-wise weren't the best that he was involved in, and he wasn't smiling enough, and he wasn't always saying please and thank you. But nonetheless, he ran the store and the repair portion partially for the Firestone business for so long. I guess the fact that he had a big heart and he cared a lot about people overcame very often his gruff and his stubborn and his less customer-oriented side as much as possible. As we discussed before, the big year in his life was 1976. A lot of things happened for him. That was the year that he got married to his very much love of his life, to Lois. And how they met was a real story. And it's quite a dynamic story, and I think it just shows that maybe the stars were very much aligned, that these two people who were quite different, and probably your average matchmaker wouldn't always put them together, they were probably put together through some amazing cosmic occurrence that showed just how special their relationship was to be. So if I got the story quite right, our Brian was involved in a court case. And in court, the other side was represented by Bob Zashin. And I actually saw on Cleveland.com, on the Cleveland Plain Dealer, there's a whole article about Mr. Zashin when he passed away, because he was such a flamboyant, dynamic, a real lawyer type of a person, if I may say so. And so it sounds like Bob walked into the courtroom, looked Brian down, and said, "You're going to lose really bad." And he probably said it a little stronger than I'm saying it. But a few minutes came, and somehow things had moved a long way. That suddenly Brian's attorney realized that he knew Bob, and the friendship kind of greased the wheels. And before you know it, Brian's attorney and Bob, this guy, was in the back room. But what was so important about Bob Zashin? As we all know, that his wife, Marcia, right? Marcia's sister was Lois. So from a courtroom that went from "you're going to lose, you stink," to "let's go in the back room, I have a great person for you," such is the cosmic evolution of the relationship between Lois and Brian. And it kind of made sense because they were so different in so many ways. Their backgrounds, their likes, their personalities were so different, and they couldn't simply meet, let's say, at a conversation at a table and find some commonalities. It had to occur in this fireworks kind of fashion. But it worked out really nicely, because as Frank said many times, that his father was truly enamored by Lois. And that's the only thing that would have taken away from his boat, which was called the Blood Vessel, and from his many parties, and from his drinking, and from his whole entire Cleveland life that we can't talk about. The only thing that would separate him efficiently from that life would be the one woman, would be Lois. And so that made quick work of his reforming. He had no problem reforming himself if it was for Lois. So he left it all behind and would shortly go off to Columbus. He left his position in the Firestone business. He left the casinos. He left the time with the boys. He left the boat, and he left the many things that we can't mention. And he embarked on a new life, on a new adventure. He first started out by getting his commercial real estate broker license, but that wasn't one of his more successful ventures. He was very proud of it. He liked that license, but I don't think it earned him too many dollars. And the couple started out in Columbus, and that it was very quiet at first. He didn't know anybody. It was a brand new start, but he was happy to follow Lois to build her dreams over there. As soon as he moved to Columbus, an opportunity came his way when a future partner would come to him and say, let's start a new venture. Let's start together the Computer Credit Corporation, a collection agency. And, who would be excited about starting a collection agency? But I think he was, in his own way, quite excited about the prospect of an organization that will get money back where it truly belonged. And he continued to operate this company for almost 40 years until just recently, before he got very sick. Despite being a fun-loving guy and so relaxed and party-oriented, inside of the office he was quite a bit more gruff. And to use a word that his son used a few times, to say blistery, there was a lot of blister in the office. But at the same time, everyone knew that there was something really special below the surface. He was a loving man and fatherly and very caring. And many of the employees who he drove crazy with his stubbornness and various character traits, he also got them to like him very much. And they stuck close to him, and they regarded him very much as a father figure, someone who they looked up to. And I think that some of his notes about what he wanted, to be said at the funeral were actually dictated to one of his secretaries who had survived her job with him many years. So while Brian was holding down the work at the collection agency, his very fancy wife Lois had a very, very exclusive law position, working with the Schachtenstein family and others. And he was extremely proud of this fact. He had never gone to college. He'd never ever seen a graduate school. His whole wife's family was so exclusive in their experiences and in their degrees and whatnot. And instead of feeling bad and comparing himself to them, he was just so proud that he was married to this woman and part of this family. She was much fancier. She was perhaps a little more smarter when it came to the books than he was, but he really respected it and sought that out and encouraged her to be who she was. And she was a hero to him. She was the woman who had broken the glass ceiling. She had become a senior attorney in firms that perhaps no woman had ever been able to reach that point before. And what's funny is that as much as you would think that they needed a little bit of space from each other, with all of their busy lives and with their personalities, they couldn't find enough time together. So coincidentally, the office building that held the collections agency was also where Lois had her office for some time as well. And they loved the fact that they were in the same office building and they could have lunch, they could hang out, they could spend time together whenever they wanted to. But these changes were great and significant, but it wasn't as amazing and significant as when our Brian became a dad at age 42. And so it wasn't so easy to have kids. They tried and tried. And finally, when little Frank came along, it was a gigantic headline. And as you can imagine, in his own ways, he was a tremendous hit with all the neighborhood friends. That everyone thought that Frank had the greatest dad. He was so big and so strong and so funny and so amazing and so interesting. And the fact that he was sometimes not easy to get along with and sometimes stubborn was forgotten in the face of his charisma and his charm and just his greatness. And he also became an idol not just to his own son and to his family, but to his extended relatives as well. So Barbara was telling me that her son Tim, actually, was truly, idolized Brian for his life. He loved the life of the casino and the boat and the bar and just, all the fun that he had. But a funny thing occurred. That one day Brian went to a bar. He went to get a drink, and who was at the bar along with him was his nephew, right? And so when he saw his nephew there drinking and having a great time, like he wanted him in his stories, wanted him so much to be, he says, maybe I got to change my ways a little bit stronger. I got to really impart to him that, he shouldn't idolize me as the Brian before. He should perhaps work on the new Brian in his idolization. But again, despite the fact of his personality, he was a tremendous father. He cared so greatly about his son, as his son said so beautifully through the letters and the worrying they took on all the time. And the main thing was that in Columbus, he didn't feel like he had given up so much in the Cleveland world. He felt like he was the richest man in the whole world. He got the best deal out of it. And it was really true that they loved each other so much, Lois and Brian. But at the same time, we didn't see the full fruit of their love until they became much older. He had his illnesses, and she certainly had hers. And they, too, played the role of caregivers to each other, watching over each other physically, emotionally, and, as before, romantically. And when she was sick, he was her most reliable caregiver. He did all that he could do to make her better. He was there with her in the facility, wherever she was in the hospital, for hours upon hours upon hours. And when she said to him that she wanted a little bit of chicken soup, to him that meant that she wanted gallons. So he would go home and cook up massive pots, gallons of chicken soup, and bring it to her on a daily basis. And it wasn't because it was his personality, it was her greatest pleasure. And if it was her greatest pleasure, he wanted to do everything that he could to fulfill it. And after she passed away, naturally one tends to think, what's next? Where am I going to be? Who else might be for in my life? But he was very clear about this, that despite the fact he was a tremendous ladies' man, and he had the charm to get any lady, that he wanted within his age, within a large age group, that, he had the potential, but he didn't want it. That life was not life without her, and he had no interest in finding anyone else to replace her in any possible way. So as again, we repeat his personality. He was stubborn, so we repeat the fact that he was stubborn many times. He was certainly difficult, but he was extremely lovable, extremely warm, very funny, and very personable. And if it wasn't for the fact that he was so personable and loving, I don't think he could get into so many fights with family and friends and then make up so many times. It just would not have been possible. So the scene that that Frank pictured a little, painted a little bit, is that his characteristics, his traits never went away, even in the midst of his more serious phases of his illness. And so Frank painted the picture of when he was leaving Wexner, when he was going out of there, he was saying goodbye to all the people there. So you can picture all these elderly people, all these sick people who had become his friends, who had warmed up their hearts. And the sight of a severely disabled young girl who was almost crying to her mother that her buddy, that her Brian was leaving when he was leaving Wexner. So that's really a picture of the man, that, how you could be so stubborn and gruff and whatever, rough around the edges, but yet be so loved at the same time, were his special accomplishments in this world. But I think we all got to realize his secret soon enough. And the more we realized his secret, the tougher he had to be. The reason why he was so tough on the outside was that it was a disguise for a very big heart. That was very sweet, and he was very gentle, and was very loving below the scene. And once you blew his cover, he either had to be very tough with you and fight with you all the time, or like in the case of his close family, you got to see who he really was, a really sweet, loving, adorable man. But I think that the most important part of the chapter that we've left out is the story of his son, of Frank, who's a humble guy. Despite his famousness on the big screen, on the television, he's a very humble person. And the biggest story is that as an only child who can so easily get overwhelmed by the needs of two parents, when you're younger in life and you have a lot going on and suddenly you have two parents who need you very badly and do not live in your zip code, many people could respond to this by having distance, by getting frustrated, by being stressed, by hiring people instead of doing it yourself. But none of which Frank did. Frank was always there, one-on-one, right there for his parents. And because their illnesses were so close, he never said, I can't do this again. He never tired from his good work. And he only showed devotion and dedication, commitment, and also a sense of humor. And so I would make a joke and say only a comedy writer could pull off what he did, but it wasn't just his sense of humor that allowed Frank to be great. It was the fact that he was devoted and loving and caring. And that's a beautiful chapter to the story of the Lessers, that our Brian loved his parents and was devoted to them. He was devoted to his wife, and thank God he was able to earn a beloved son who was devoted to him as well. And in this room, he has devoted friends and family members and people who always remember him. So we won't forget him as a stubborn, tough guy. We won't forget all the fights, but we'll always remember how much we loved him and how much he always made up in the end, and how we wish him a good life. And we say thank you to all the things that he gave to us, all the wisdom and all the caring and all the love. So I wasn't able to touch on all the fun stuff, on the life on the blood vessel and all the cool stuff that occurred in Cleveland. So cautiously I invite his friends, Fred and perhaps Joe, to share with us a few words.
Well, Brian and I go back 70-some years, since the beginning of school, almost at the second grade. That's where we connected, and we stayed friends, up until now. And he was my best friend. He was my best man at my wedding. I was his. And I forgot half my notes. That's the reason so you'll be lucky. We went into business together. We had a good relationship there. We bought apartment buildings and stuff like that. And to be honest with you, I think we only had one fight, and that was like about 3 weeks ago. He wanted to go out to eat. He called Steven, I think, Lisa. I don't know why. Every miscommunications. Calls me. I says, okay, I'll be there. And fortunately, I didn't get there when he wanted. And boy, he was mad as heck. And so for that day, we were mad at each other, and which we regained and made up. I know a lot of the hidden past, but we'll keep it a secret. He'll be greatly missed by me, and I can't begin to tell you how much, and I'm sure by a lot of other people.
Thank you very much. Any of the friends would like to speak on his behalf? I just wanted to share with you a brief selection. It's called To Those I Love and Those Who Love Me. When I am gone, release me, let me go. I have so many things to see and to do. You mustn't tie yourself to me with tears. Be happy that we had precious years. I gave you my love, you can only guess how much you gave to me in happiness. I thank you for the love you each have shown, but now it's time I traveled on alone. So grieve a while for me, if grieve you must, then let our grief be comforted by trust. It's only for a while that we must part, so bless the memories within your heart. I won't be far away, for life goes on, so if you need me, call, and I will come. Though you can't see or touch me, I'll be near. I'll have my love around you, soft and clear. And when you must come this way alone, I'll greet you with a smile and say, welcome home. Just some brief announcements. Following today's chapel service, we're going to go in procession to the cemetery, Beit Olam, which is 25796 Chagrin Boulevard on the corner of Richmond and Chagrin. And the family will receive friends this evening from 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. at the home 2876 Brainerd Road and Pepper Pike. And memorial contributions can be made, if so desired, to the American Cancer Fund. At this point, I'm going to ask everyone to please rise for the memorial prayer. And then following the memorial prayer, we're going to have the casket be escorted out first in front of people. And we have some selected pallbearers so far, but if you'd like to be volunteering as a pallbearer, when we call for pallbearers, please come forward at that time. El Malei Rachamim, Sheikhein Bamromim, Hamsei Menucha Nechain Al Kanfei Hashchina, B'Malois Kedoshim O Tahirim, Kezayra Kia Masirim, Es Nishmas, Benyamin Yehuda Ben Feitel, Shehalach Loilamo, Bavor Shanachnu Mispalin Bar Haskaras Nishmaso, Began Eden Tehei Menuchaso, L'chein Bal Harachamim, Yastirechu B'seisa Kanafav Li'olamim, B'yitzor B'tzor Chayim Es Nishmaso, Adonai Hu Nachalaso, V'sanuach Al Mishkavo B'Shalom, B'Ne'mar, Amen. O God, full of mercy, who dwells on high, grant proper rest on the wings of the divine presence, in the lofty levels of the holy and the pure ones who shine like the glow of the firmament, for the soul of our beloved Bian Lesser, who has gone into his world, and for whom people pray. May his resting place be in the Garden of Eden, and may the Master of Mercy shelter him in the shelter of his wings for all eternity, and may he rebind his soul in the bonds of eternal life. God is his heritage, and may he repose in peace on his resting place, and we say together, Amen. We ask that folks remain standing. And at this point, if the pallbearers could come forward, the pallbearers are going to escort the casket, and then the casket will be followed by the family members, and then the rest of the folks in the chapel will fall in behind.